In this video, you'll learn the very best ways to master strumming and picking chords on guitar. Many people struggle with fluency when it comes to strumming and picking chords. However, there is one approach that solves this issue, absolutely guaranteed. However, many people don't do it simply because it feels wrong. Hi, this is Simon Candy from Acoustic Guitar Lessons Online.net, and in this lesson I sit down with beginner guitar specialist Maurice to discuss and demonstrate the very best exercises and drills for mastering strumming and picking chords on guitar. When strumming and picking chords on guitar, the key is in the fluency, not necessarily in perfect sounding formed chords. Now this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it works. However, because of that, that's why people tend to avoid this, because it just feels wrong and it's not sort of immediately rewarding. However, believe me, if you invest time into this one particular exercise, it's really gonna do you well as a guitar player as far as your rhythm guitar is concerned. So we'll have a look at that in detail, along with some other drills that are gonna help with your strumming and picking. Watch until the end of the video for a very special free 5-day mini course I've created for you, all about bringing up your skills in all the various areas of rhythm guitar playing on the acoustic. So let's get into it.
The first thing, and absolutely the most important thing, is being able to create a constant flow. So strumming is basically your hand moving down and up in succession. And a lot of people, they have really choppy strumming because they stop, when they're doing a downstroke or an upstroke or whatever. And it tends to have no flow, and it doesn't really sound like music. One way to look at it is, when you're riding a bike, a bicycle, let's say that, you don't have a, fancy bicycle with gears. It's if you don't stop pedaling, the bicycle is going to stop and it's going to fall over. So strumming kind of works like that. If you keep your hands moving, it keeps everything in sync and flowing. So that's the first thing, is constant flow.
That's a great point. Often it's coordinating the fretting and strumming hands. You might work on your chord changes, you work on strumming patterns, but that doesn't necessarily mean that both are just going to magically synchronize together and everything's going to be great. You've got to be able to keep things, going, like you say, riding a bike. Often the issue is, strumming out a chord, stopping, making the chord change, strumming again, stopping, and,
right.
and developing that habit of stopping every time you want to make a chord change. And I think guitar playing in general, but if we're talking strumming and some of the other things we'll cover today, I think you've really got to be able to make and we'll talk about chord changes, but you've got to make chord changes without having to look at your fretting hand. And you've got to be able to strum and pick without looking at your picking hand, because otherwise, you're going to be sort of a slave to that. You're going to be, watching tennis, basically. You're going to be here, then you're going to be there,
Yep.
and you're going to be here, and you're going to,
and then looking at the page or whatever you're looking at in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's stop, start, and that's what you reinforce. So you do need to force the strumming with the hand, or force the hand to move with the strumming. So, once you've got some strumming or a strumming pattern going and you've got a chord change, then you really want to keep that strumming going with the chord change, regardless of how good or bad this is. It doesn't matter if this is a bit, incomplete, or you're strumming on a C and you're getting to a G, and as you strum
right.
G, you might only have, these fingers down, this one's getting down
right.
as you're strumming, but that's all fine. Our goal in that context is to get the two hands working together. It doesn't matter if they're not perfect or,
Bingo.
Let's get them in sync, and then you can continue working on isolating the fretting hand if you need to get those chord changes better, and work on the strumming and the sound and so forth. Things we'll get into a little bit more deeply.
That's exactly it, and that means you have to ignore the sound, and people have a hard time doing that. And yeah, our ears are really well developed because we listen to music all the time. But when you're learning to play guitar and learning how to strum, it's really important to just ignore that sound. If you make mistakes, just keep going, keep going, keep going. Here's something that just while you were talking, I thought about, and it's a stark difference between two types of guitar players, and it's because of the way they approach rhythm. There's two types of guitar players that I teach. They're the two types of people in general. The first type of person is the person that comes in and everything has to be perfect. And so that's why they stop, they look, they check, they hover, they do all these things. And we'll talk more about some of those things, how that affects those kinds of people later on. Those people have a hard time. I was one of them. Okay, it was not easy for me. It was because I approached it totally incorrectly. Meanwhile, I get other students, and they don't care. They just like, I'm playing guitar, and they're letting everything flow. And because of that, they make way more progress in way less time, because the foundation, which is rhythm, is laid nice and consistent and flows well. Then the chord changes, and then all the other things that create a really nice consistent sound, that all comes after. We obviously pay attention to those too, but the more important piece is what you just told everybody, is to try to keep this strumming going, and just don't worry about the other hand for now. And we can separate the two and deal with all that. But that's the most important piece. Another important piece is the smoothness of strumming. A lot of people in their strumming, what they do is they strum really loud on the downstroke, and then the upstroke is not as loud. So it's very inconsistent, and that leads to like not sounding that good. I mean, it doesn't sound full, it doesn't sound proper, but it also creates a bad habit, which is really hard to get rid of. So it's really important to be able to early on isolate the strumming. So that's what I do with my students, is I get them to ignore the chord hand and just get them to learn how to listen for and get the feel for strumming smoothly. All right. And that's a way that you can kind of develop that ability that later on will help when the chord hand is there. And that's one approach that I use, and one thing that I focus on early on too.
What about things like chordal picking? We're talking about strumming and the importance of strumming and so forth. What about picking the notes out of the chord, which we hear often in tunes as well? Do you have particular strategies developing that?
Yeah. So when it comes to just picking and what we call arpeggiating chords, and the most important thing is people really struggle getting different rhythms while they're arpeggiating. It's very difficult. They can do it while strumming, but it's very difficult for them to kind of get the idea. So one way I because rhythms are our theme here, I will say that one way that I get them to kind of understand and feel the rhythm so that they can arpeggiate it properly or pick it properly is by getting them to strum it beforehand. And even with the chords, right? Getting them to say, hey, this is how this rhythm works, or getting them to understand how it works, in a strumming context. And then once they get that, then it's a lot easier for them to translate that to their picking hand. And that is actually a really, that's a place that a lot of people struggle, trying to get rhythms with their picking hand, to make sure that the timing's right and all that stuff. So yeah, so that's kind of my approach in a nutshell.
I think, I mean, chordal picking, I call it chordal picking, or arpeggiating the chords, or picking the chords, or whatever, is great. People love it because it sounds just that little bit more sophisticated, right? When you pick
it's awesome.
chords. And I mean, it's I think timing again, similar to sort of when strumming, it's been able to technically do what's required, but also keep everything flowing. But it's a great skill to have, because then you can ad lib with it. There's a lot of songs I would play that have picking in it that, I mean, if I'm doing a gig and it's Hotel California, okay, fine. I don't know the picking arrangement, but I can hear the song in my head. I've played it enough times that I can ad lib the picking for that and fool people. And if I don't, it doesn't matter. I'm just ad libbing the picking. But having that skill means you don't have to go and remember all these picking arrangements for certain songs. Of course, you can do that, and some are probably more specific than others. In terms of developing the skill, again, I think, getting a bit of a radar, if you like, for where the strings are, so you don't have to look. If you're looking, then you're never going to.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it doesn't matter how many times you do it. If you don't practice without looking, you're not going to get good at doing it without looking, really. So learn a pattern, sure, whatever it might be, something like this. Now, obviously not from day one. Like you said, you can build it up much slower. But when you get to the point where you are picking a pattern of sorts, I would get students to do that and look, and then without stopping the picking, look away. So you've got it going. So you've looked, you've got it going, and then you look away as you continue. And even if you hit a wrong string, this is the thing with this approach. It's very forgiving, because if you're on a G chord, there is no wrong string really. It's just another note in the chord, and a lot of those chords. So it's once you've got the flow going, it's actually more forgiving than your strumming probably. Well, strumming perhaps too, but it's hard to hit a wrong note. A lot of the time when I chord or pick, I might hit a string I don't intend to, but it's fine. The only mistake I might make, I don't, but the mistake you could make is stopping thinking you've made a mistake, and that's the mistake in itself. There goes the flow. The other issue I find people have is kind of similar to strumming, is chord changes with picking. Picking a pattern and then continuing on a different chord and maintaining the timing. I find often it can help if we're picking on a G chord and we're going to go to C, and just pick the first note and stop there. So you're picking the full bar on one chord and just the root note of the next chord. Form the chord. Don't just put the third finger there and play the C note. Form the chord, pick C. So there was a gap there between the two chords. You've crossed it. So you've been able to connect to the next chord without having to think also about, what's my pattern there? Where am I picking on this C chord? So you can just deal.
I actually do the same thing with people with strumming sometimes. When it's complex strum pattern, I just get them to hit the next one.
That's it.
Exactly.
Just the next
same concept.
Because you're always going to have these gaps when you're breaking things up and isolating things. So you work with those things, but then they create a gap that you got to join. So just step over into that next part without doing all the picking. And once you've got that, the picking becomes much easier. And when you've got it going, it'll just click in. You'll go, wow, yeah, I can think here, and it sounds all right. A general, I don't know if we call it a rule, but generally speaking, it's best to pick from the root note of the chord. So if you're on an E minor, pick the E note. If you're on C, pick the C first and then pick your pattern. It doesn't have to be like that. It isn't always like that, but most times that's going to sound best. And the other thing is with the picking itself, generally speaking, it will come down to the specific context, but I find picking in the direction of the next string. So you're naturally following through to where you need to be next. So if I'm picking a pattern on a C chord where I'm picking strings 5, 4, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, I'm going to pick down on those lower three because that's the direction I'm going. When I get to the top string, I'm going to pick up because I'm heading back in this direction. If I pick down on that top string, now I've got an extra movement I've got to make to get to where I need to pluck that second string and so forth. So whatever the pattern is, it's going to flow better if you follow through to where you need to be next with your direction. So it's not necessarily going to be alternating your pick as you pick up and down the chord, down, up, down, up, down. It's typically not going to be the best way to do it. That's pretty inefficient and will create a lot more work for the same sound, essentially. If you like this video, then you'll love this Acoustic Rhythm Guitar Techniques mini course. In this course, you learn 5 ways to sound much better as a rhythm guitarist, including strumming techniques, chordal picking, rhythm riffs and fills, as well as cool sounding chords and embellishments. Over the course of 5 days, you will not only be trained in depth on each of these areas of your guitar playing, but also how to put it all together to create great sounding music. So click the link in the description below this video to gain access to the Acoustic Rhythm Guitar Techniques mini course. Let me know in the comments section what acoustic guitar topics you'd like to see covered in future videos. I read every comment, so I'd love to hear your suggestions. If you like this video, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and of course hit the notification bell button so YouTube can tell you when I release a new video. This is Simon Candy from AcousticGuitarLessonsOnline.net. As always, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.